All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Bree Swenson. I'm the project lead for STEP, the Sustainable Transportation Equity Project. We're going to get started this morning. So welcome to the second applicant teleconference for STEP, the first one specifically for the Planning and Capacity Building Grant. On the call, I also have Jamie Tipton, who's the acting manager over STEP, Leslie Baruti, Carb staff, who's taking notes for us today, and then Matthew Ong, another Carb staff, who will be moderating the questions that we receive live. So I have a handful of announcements before we get started, so bear with me. First off, I wanted to acknowledge the disruptions to the economy, the pressures on our healthcare systems, and community-led action on systemic racism that we have continued to witness over the last few months. In light of this, we especially appreciate the time that you're dedicating to address transportation equity in your communities right now, and we're committed to listening and learning from community residents throughout California and working to address institutional and systemic racism in our work. We have two types of grants under STEP, the Planning and Capacity Building Grant and the Implementation Grant. This teleconference is specifically to answer questions about the Planning and Capacity Building Grant. So if you are interested in the Implementation Grant, that Q&A session is at 2 p.m. today. So you can find the registration link on the Moving California STEP webpage. We linked to that. We sent the link in the chat. So you should all see that there. As I mentioned before, this is the second applicant teleconference we've had. The first was on Tuesday, June 30th. The Q&A document that includes all of the questions and answers that were covered in that first session is up on STEP's Moving California webpage, and we also included it as a handout in this GoToWebinar. So you can find it in the handout section of the bar on your right. The deadline for both grants is August 31st, 2020 at 5 p.m. Pacific time. The Planning and Capacity Building Grant has a maximum of $2 million available. And the funding available for, as you all know, the economy is not operating as it normally does, and the funding available for STEP has been impacted because of this. We have a public work group meeting this coming Friday, July 24th from 10 to 11 a.m. to hear public feedback on our proposed updated funding amounts based on new information about the funding available. We won't be able to confirm exactly how much money will be available for this program until after we receive public feedback on Friday. But we want to make it clear that it will likely be less than $2 million for the Planning and Capacity Building Grant. The resulting determination will be posted on STEP's Moving California webpage, the one I linked to. And information about the public work group meeting is available at Carb's website. I can actually pull up that link as well, and I'll put it in the chat. So you all are able to attend that webinar and hear about the upcoming funding amounts. Let me get this link for you. So I want to talk for a second about technical assistance we have for STEP. Estelano Advisors leads the technical assistance team for both application and implementation technical assistance. The deadline to fill out the technical assistance survey was 5 p.m. on July 15th. You're still welcome to submit a response to the survey if you want technical assistance, but since it's after the deadline, we cannot guarantee that the full scope of technical assistance services will be available to you. The survey to request technical assistance is linked on in the STEP solicitation and on the STEP Moving California webpage. And if you've already filled out the technical assistance survey, you should have received an email from Richard France or Riley O'Brien from Estelano Advisors to start discussing your project. So today we'll read and respond to the questions we received over email first, and specifically the ones we received before the email in deadline of July 17th at 5 p.m. And then we'll open it up to the folks on the call who have additional questions. If we have time after the questions on the call have been addressed, we'll respond to any other questions we received after that deadline of July 17th, 5 p.m. After addressing So after addressing that first round of emailed in questions, when we get to live questions, you can either type your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand virtually and we'll unmute you. You don't need to identify yourself when you ask a question, but if you don't want to identify yourself, it's better that you chat in your question, because when we unmute you, we will call your name out to let you know that you've been unmuted. So we'll only respond to questions until 12 p.m. today. So if we get more questions than we can take in these 2 hours, we will answer those questions in the next applicant teleconference for the Planning and Capacity Building Grant, which is on August 13th. We may not be able to respond to some questions today, because we don't have a good answer for you at this time. So we'll provide a written response to those questions and post them alongside all of the other questions and answers that we covered today in the Q&A document for this session, the same way that we did for the last session. The solicitation says that the Q&A documents will be posted within 3 business days or by early next week. We'll try to get them posted by that time, but it may take a little bit longer. And in the event of any differences between the Q&A document and what we said today, the written responses take precedence over what was said in this teleconference. So those are all my announcements. We'll move on to the questions that we received over email and our responses. The first set of questions that we received is about applicant eligibility. So 2 questions about school districts. Can a school district be considered a nonprofit community-based organization and qualify as an applicant for an implementation grant? And also, are school districts able to apply for funding? And actually at this point, I'm going to turn off my webcam and make sure you guys can see my screen. And I'm gonna actually pull up, here, share my screen. And I'm gonna actually pull up the parts of the solicitation that are relevant for the questions that we're getting. So hopefully the scrolling isn't too bad. All right. So the question was, can the school district be considered a nonprofit community-based organization, or are school districts eligible to apply for funding? So the answer is that local governments are eligible to apply to STEP as lead applicants or as sub-applicants. And the definition of a local government is actually in Appendix A, the definition that STEP uses for a local government, which is eligible as a lead applicant, is in Appendix A and states that any non-state public agency, including but not limited to cities, counties, councils of governments, air districts, transit agencies, school districts, and joint powers authorities, is considered a local government under STEP. So that does include school districts. The second question is, can a COG serving as the MPO and RTPA, the Metropolitan Planning Organization and Regional Transportation Planning Authority for a region, apply for STEP funds as the lead applicant and pass through the funds to 4 local qualifying member agencies to fund STEP eligible projects? I'm going to take us to the solicitation here for this, page 13. So per page 13 of the Planning and Capacity Building Grant solicitation, if an entity that would be the lead applicant does not have the administrative capacity to assume this role, they may be a sub-applicant and partner with another entity applying as the lead applicant. In this scenario, all lead applicant requirements would still apply. The lead applicant would still enter into a grant agreement with Carb and assume responsibility and accountability for the use and expenditure of received STEP funds, but the partnership could be set up so that the lead applicant supports the grant administratively and the sub-applicant leads project implementation. Our next question on lead applicant eligibility is, can a lead applicant apply for more than one application? For example, can City X's Department of Y apply as a lead and then another department, Z, apply as a lead for another applicant? Or can there be only one application from the same city? And then we got a similar question, is a city allowed to submit more than one grant application from different departments? Our answer is STEP has no limitations on the number of proposals that may be submitted by a single applicant or from a single community. The next question, we want to ensure that we meet the expectations of a community-based organization as a lead applicant. As a nonprofit organization whose entire team lives in Los Angeles and is focused on transportation equity, we believe that we do. We are also aware that perhaps Carb has a different perspective on the concept of community-based organization. Can we discuss lead applicant eligibility? So you can discuss that with the technical assistance provider. We cannot discuss individual circumstances with potential applicants at Carb. But before I move on to talking about what a community-based organization is, we have another question that's kind of tied in the same way. So the question is, if the focus area of an organization is a specific city or county and the STEP project is within that metropolitan area, does the organization meet the requirement of a community-based organization, which is a nonprofit organization that is place-based with an explicit geographic focus area that includes the STEP community? So the definition of a community-based organization that STEP uses is in Appendix A of the solicitation again. So go up to that. Oops, I passed it. Right here. So I'll just read this once, and if we get more questions about this in the future, I'll just refer you back to this definition. A community-based organization, according to STEP, is a nonprofit organization that is place-based with an explicit geographic focus area that includes the STEP community. The organization's staff members, volunteers, or board members should reside in the community where the project is located. The organization must have a demonstrated record of at least 1 full year providing transportation or equity-related services in the STEP community. To qualify as a lead applicant, a community-based organization must have tax-exempt status with the Internal Revenue Service under Internal Revenue Code Section 501, be tax-exempt under California state law, have at least 1 year of incorporation prior to proposal submittal, and be based in California or have at least 1 full-time staff person based in California. So it's up to the applicant to determine if they meet this definition of a community-based organization. Our last question that we received on applicant eligibility is, so we have managed transportation equity planning in our city for more than 5 years, and we're the lead organization on a transportation project. We believe that we have significant capabilities to coordinate and manage a multi-collaboration effort, leveraging other public and private investment and scaling up several very high-profile mobility projects in disadvantaged communities. Do we meet the criteria for providing transportation services? So STEP has no specific criteria for the partners that will actually provide transportation services as part of a STEP-funded project. Per page 14 of the Planning and Capacity Building Grant Solicitation. So move down to that actually. The proposal must demonstrate the ability of each sub-applicant listed here to support the lead applicant and fulfill their roles on specific projects or project elements on time and within the budget. A statement of qualifications must be included. Here we are. A statement of qualifications must be included for each sub-applicant that demonstrates that they have successfully implemented projects or project elements similar in scope or size in California within the last 7 years. So that's what we're looking for any applicant that is going to take on an implementation role within a STEP proposal. Now we're going to move on to just one question about resource contributions. So the question is, I'm reaching out to you to confirm that there is no match requirement for the Planning and Capacity Building Grant Solicitation. And that is correct. There is no resource contribution required for Planning and Capacity Building Grant proposals. All right, I have a few questions more about process. So first question is, what organization is providing technical assistance on Carb's behalf? So Estelano Advisors is the lead on the team of technical assistance providers that are available to support STEP applicants and recipients. And there are a number of other organizations that are supporting Estelano Advisors on that effort. The second question is, would grant submissions from one city compete against each other? So if there were multiple submissions from one city. And the answer is yes. All planning and capacity building grant proposals will be scored against each other. All right, we have a couple questions about the STEP community boundary. Our first is, we are talking with government entities and community partners about a pilot with related projects that would benefit and would all be within a specific city or county. Does this metropolitan area meet the requirement for a contiguous boundary? I'm going to go back to Appendix A and pull up the definition of a STEP community here. So the answer is, if the city or county that comprises the STEP community has one continuous boundary, then it would meet the contiguous requirement of a STEP community. And you can refer to Appendix A for the complete definition of a STEP community, which I have pulled up here, to make sure that the area that you would like to focus on meets these requirements. And then the second question about subcommunities, is there some flexibility in the contiguous requirement to allow for a city to apply for an implementation grant? That's not the right Q&A session, but I will answer this too for the planning capacity building grant. So is there some flexibility in the contiguous requirement to allow for a city to apply for a planning and capacity building grant that would include two parts of a district that is separated by another city, even though it's not technically contiguous? So this is a situation where there's a community that is split, and in between the two parts of the community, there's another city. So the answer is that we don't have any flexibility to account for that situation. The STEP community must align with the definition here in Appendix A to be eligible for funding. If an applicant wanted to apply for funding for two separate parts of that district or of that community, they could do that. They could apply for two separate planning and capacity building grants. All right, so those were all the questions that we received over email beforehand. We'll start taking live questions now. I think we'll start with questions over the phone if you want to raise your hand, and then we'll take questions in the chat afterwards. So Matthew, you want to go ahead and start unmuting people?
Sure. Right now we have a raised hand from Ambreen. She wants to speak. I have unmuted her, but it seems like she's self-mute also right now.
Ambreen, if you'd like to talk, you're self-muted, so there you
go. Sorry, Bree, that was a mistake. I didn't realize it.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, yeah, no problem. All right. Then we have a hand raised by Loretta Edit. I've unmuted you, Loretta. You're also on self-mute if you want to unmute yourself.
Loretta, we still can't hear you. Oh, there you are. It looks like you're unmuted now.
Yeah, we're still not able to hear you, Loretta.
Yeah, sorry about that. We can keep you unmuted, so if you can figure out what the issue is, talk at any point. Otherwise, you can also chat your question and we'll make sure to get to it.
Yeah, I see you've chatted in some questions, Loretta, so I'll make sure that we do get to those. Kirk Ants, I see you have your hand raised, so I've unmuted you. if you'd like to speak.
Hello, this is Kirk Hans from Community Bridges Lifeline. And my question is, would an agency be eligible for STEP funding if they already receive funding from another Carb grant program?
The short answer is likely yes. We're not going to double fund a project. So if you receive funding for the same items, obviously we won't refund those items, but we have gotten this question before about clean mobility options in particular, and it is possible for an agency to receive funds from multiple state grants or multiple Carb grants. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it for the raised hands. And then we have some questions that were typed in, so I'll go to those. The first one, the grant solicitation, page 19, includes the instruction to submit a STEP community proposed map, and it describes it as a map shapefile. This implies a GIS readable electronic file as opposed to a graphic visual map. Is a GIS shapefile required, or is a conventional graphic map or set of maps acceptable?
Yes, here I pulled it up in the solicitation. This is page 19 of the Planning and Capacity Building Grant solicitation. We are asking for a map shapefile, and that does mean a GIS shapefile. That's something that we've asked the technical assistance providers to prioritize in their support to potential applicants. So if you don't have the GIS services or whatever to do that yourself, the technical assistance providers can support you. The reason that we want a GIS shapefile is to be able to make sure that the geographic boundary requirements of the STEP community are being met by potential applicants.
All right, second question. How specific must the quote-unquote tentative project's location be? For this project, we expect that the work funded by STEP planning grants would help develop locations specifically rather than this being already known. May we describe in the narrative potential general locations for the transportation assistance systems that we are envisioning?
Sure. So the solicitation specifically asks for tentative project locations because we understand that some of that may be determined during project implementation. Basically, any changes during project implementation should not impact how the proposal would have been scored. We need to make sure that if there are changes that are made in the future, they cannot impact if that proposal would have received funding. At minimum, the tentative project locations must be within the STEP community, and they must stay within a disadvantaged or low-income community if that's how they were previously identified. But applicants, we do want applicants also to clarify where it's expected that identified project specifics, including project location, might change. I will also just note that if for the planning and capacity building grants in particular, we're not expecting applicants to know where potential transportation systems that they might explore with community residents will be located. The tentative project location here is asking for the location of the planning project. So that could be a large, a large area, not just like the place where one transit station will be. Hope that clarifies things.
Okay, next question. The preface of this is large, so just ask me if you want me to repeat anything, Bree. The solicitation also requires that all aspects of the proposal, including identification of the vision and projects, must be developed through community engagement. Community engagement may be undertaken specifically to apply for STEP funds, or may have been previously completed as part of another relevant local planning process undertaken in and with the STEP community. We have been engaged in community resident representation since 2018 through today. And as a part of their work that they are addressing community-based transportation assistance systems. They have preliminary ideas, but expect that specifically defining these systems is what that planning grant is, and the additional community engagements it will make possible is for. So maybe propose general project ideas in the grant solicitation.
Sure. So Carb, I think I'm going to go back to my last response a little bit. So in the planning and capacity building grant proposals, Carb does not expect applicants to identify specific transportation projects. If the proposed project will involve community engagement to identify those transportation projects, the proposal should identify that community engagement as the proposed project for the planning and capacity building grant, not the potential future transportation projects. So if the question is about, general project ideas for, transportation projects that you'll vet with community residents, I think you need to know very little about what those project ideas will be. We're really interested in how you're going to engage community residents in the decision making on those projects, or what those projects will be. Does that help?
Next question. Is the community engagement to date described here, or actually, sorry, I think I'll have to get back to that one, just to pull up other information. Question, can we write a contractor directly into the grant scope of work without going out to bid, i.e. naming a specific consultant for public engagement or other activities?
I think that has to be determined by your individual contracting processes. We're just looking for you to identify whatever sub-applicants and community partners are a part of the proposal at the time you apply.
And then next, regarding contiguous boundaries, it was understood from the last meeting that we're free to draw a large enough boundary and call it our STEP community to catch a whole area. That would capture gaps in the middle. Is that correct?
I'll just reference you back to the definition of the STEP community here. As long as you're following this, it is eligible.
All right. Next question. So the $2 million anticipated is total available. Are there any limits in terms of how much one application can apply for?
We have no limits on the amount of funding that any one proposal can apply for.
Next question, is a sub-applicant required, or can you have just a lead applicant and a community partner?
Let me pull up that part of the solicitation. All right, so this is page, what is this, page 12? Yes. Page 12 of the solicitation kind of outlines our high-level applicant requirements here in this paragraph. So if the lead applicant is a federally recognized tribe, no other applicants are required to be a part of the proposal, though of course partnerships are still strongly encouraged. If the lead applicant is a local government, they must have at least one other sub-applicant because at least one other applicant, a sub-applicant, because they must have a community-based organization as a part of the proposal as a sub-applicant, and vice versa. If the lead applicant is a community-based organization, at least one of the sub-applicants must be a local government. So in those two scenarios, if the lead applicant is a local government or a community-based organization, you must also have a sub-applicant. It's not enough to have a community-based organization be a community partner, they must be a sub-applicant.
All right, next question. How many applicants do you anticipate for this grant?
Sure. I'm just going to go up to that part of the solicitation. We're up here. Oh gosh, I don't actually know exactly where it is, but somewhere up in the first few pages, we say that for the planning and capacity building grants, we anticipate funding somewhere around 10 proposals. However, like I mentioned before, we anticipated that with $2 million available, and we will likely have less than that, so we will likely fund less than 10 proposals. But it's solely dependent on the proposals that come in and how much the highest scoring ones ask for funding.
All right, next question. Could you please let us know how much is the planning grant for each proposed project, which I think you touched on a bit.
Yeah, so there's no minimum or maximum amount that you're required to ask for funding. So it's completely dependent on how much funding you need within, how much funding is available to complete your project.
Next question. Is there a minimum size project area, or is there a minimum number of census tracts that should be included in the project area? Is one tract too small?
No, is the short answer. We have no requirements for size of the STEP community.
Next question. The person signed up for the technical assistance this morning, and they see that the deadline has passed, so they just learned about the opportunity. Is it still possible to speak with the technical assistant consultants to vet a project's eligibility?
It's possible. At this time, the technical assistance providers are determining what their capacity is to support applicants, potential applicants that miss that deadline. So you will get an email from Riley or Richard at Estelano Advisors, and you can communicate more with them about what that likelihood is.
Next question. Are you using a technical definition of equity?
I'm not sure exactly what is meant by a technical definition, but I will just pull up the definition that we're using for specifically transportation equity. So we consider transportation equity to be when a community's transportation system provides accessible, affordable, environmentally sustainable, reliable, and safe transportation options to all residents, in particular those that have been disproportionately impacted by pollution or lack access to services. And transportation equity is intrinsically linked to access to economic opportunities and occurs when community residents have the power to make decisions about their transportation systems. That is the basically the concept that this project is based off of.
And then another question related to funding that you may have addressed. What is the likelihood that planning and capacity funding will be diminished?
Yeah, so likely. We will be as, as soon as that information becomes public, we'll be as open about it as we can. On Friday, there's that public work group meeting. Encourage you to attend if you can and provide feedback on our proposal for for STEP and for the other transportation equity projects that Carb administers. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. Well, actually, I'll say also, like, we'll make sure when that funding amount is finalized that all of the materials on our website are updated. So you'll be able to see the final funding amount available.
Next question. How much community engagement is required in advance of applying for a grant?
Yeah. So for the planning grant, it's significantly less than for the implementation grant. I'm going to identify, I think the biggest place where that comes in to play is in the grant framework, which is page 7. So in this section, we ask that the projects that are being proposed for planning capacity building funding are identified by the applicant as a result of a community engagement process. So that's really in the solicitation or in the application where we ask for community engagement to be a part of the development of the proposal. We understand that, especially for the planning and capacity building grant, likely a lot of the project will be focused on that community engagement. And so a lot of that can be done once funding has been received.
Next question. Is it acceptable for the project timeline to be 12 to 18 months, as long as it fits within your overall schedule, or are longer timelines required?
Yes, any timeline within I'm pulling up the timeline here. Here we are. Any timeline within our overall timeline for the funding is allowed. We have no preference. The grant term has to end by March 31st, 2025. So, that will be, we're basically saying there's somewhere around a 3.5 or 4 year potential grant term. But if you want to have your grant term be shorter than that, the project won't take as long, as is very possible for some of the planning grant proposals. Then you're allowed to have the grant term be anything up until March 31st, 2025.
Next question. Our previous community engagement process led to a sustainability plan with specific transportation and mobility goals. Does the language in the ineligible costs list on Appendix E, page E-3, exclude projects that would help us achieve these goals? The appendix states, costs for implementing existing policies, plans, ordinances, or programs, such as local government staff salaries, supplies, meetings, etc., as an ineligible cost. Can you provide clarification?
Sure. I think that if I think that we can get back to you with a better definition of what this ineligible cost is, but it sounds like, without knowing more, it sounds like your description of having a plan identifying a high level vision or objectives for a community, and wanting the funding to dig deeper, perhaps identify other transportation projects, would still be eligible, an eligible cost. So I will include more of a description of what exactly we mean here in the Q&A document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of the question might be asking if they have an existing plan, are they able to have that funded?
Right. And I think that's maybe where the ineligible cost comes in. If you, if you already have an existing plan, and I don't know why you would do this, but you would want to like add on to that existing plan, that might not be an eligible cost. But plans are a little bit trickier than, you know, projects and stuff, where really we're looking for this funding to build more capacity, build more transportation equity in a community, and not just continue what already exists within that community. So I think that's what this ineligible cost is getting at. But again, we'll clarify in the Q&A document.
Next question, are bicycle or pedestrian recreation trails considered eligible projects?
That sounds like an implementation grant eligible project. So tune in at 2 p.m. today. The planning, I'll just go up to the planning and capacity building grant projects. These are the eligible projects, really involve like community and stakeholder engagement, land use and transportation focused plan development, and capacity building for clean transportation projects as well. So any substantive infrastructure would not be eligible under the planning and capacity building grant.
Next question, when was STEP first presented to the public?
I would say the official beginning of STEP was, I'll pull up the, I don't actually know if I have this in the timeline. The STEP was presented to the California Air Resources Board in October of 2019. So late October at the California Air Resources Board meeting. And that was, and then a few days later, still in October, we had our first public worker meeting to design STEP and to get public feedback on the design of STEP. You can see, I'll just note that here on our Moving California webpage at the bottom, there's an archives section, and you can see all of the materials that we presented to the public over the course of that design process in the archives.
Next question. How recently must the community engagement that was done to lay the groundwork for this planning work must have been done? And this is referring to the base of the grant framework diagram.
Sure, yeah, so I think we discussed that a little bit already. I'll pull that up again. That's it. Here we are. So, you know, as I noted before, we understand that if a planning and capacity building project has a strong community engagement focus during its implementation, then you know, maybe it needs less community engagement before the project has been proposed. But we do want to see that some work has been done to make sure that the proposed project is actually addressing the community's transportation needs. So we have a little bit more information down here below in terms of what we're looking for with community engagement. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly, you know, this is something that will be scored in the scoring criteria, so it'll be scored against all of the other proposals. So I'm not sure at this point, you know, what we'll get in the proposals and how they'll compare to each other. So I can't say, you know, what is sufficient to get funding. I will say that we have no eligibility threshold for this. So there is no, you know, as long as you do something, write something in this section of the application, you will move. That will not inhibit you from moving on to the scoring process.
Is there a general preference at all for how long ago the community engagement was?
So
whether sooner or was longer ago?
Yeah, so the only thing we have here is These community engagement activities must have been conducted within at least 4 years of the proposal submittal date. So when you submit the proposal, that community engagement must have been done within the last 4 years. We have no, preference beyond that. Yeah.
And then the final question that we have right now: how can we identify contractors in the application when we don't know who will win a competitive bid?
Sure. So we do ask for sub-applicants to be identified where possible. I think we also understand that there are, timeline and logistical issues with identifying subcontractors in a bidding process before a proposal is submitted. So we would like in your proposal you to note where a sub-applicant, where a contractor will be, a subcontractor will be a part of the project that has not yet been identified, and what the qualifications you're looking for out of a subcontractor are, and we'll use that to try to score the proposal that way.
And then we got one more question in. Is it acceptable to use the public engagement results done by an organization which is not the lead applicant or sub-applicant as a community engagement process needed for a STEP planning grant for a separate organization?
We have not specified who has to have done that community engagement. So, if it's been done by a different organization, that is allowed.
And so those are all the questions at this time that we've received.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to get their questions answered before we close. I see one hand up, but I see two. I see maybe a couple hands up. Matthew, can you look again at the people on the phone? See if anyone else has a question.
Yes, I only see Loretta still has her hand raised.
Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes. If you have think of any other questions in the next couple of minutes, please chat them in or raise your hand, and otherwise we'll close early.
Okay. Loretta just typed in another question. Okay. What is meant by appropriately incentivizing community members for their time and expertise? Page E-4.
Sure. I'm just going to pull that up. So yeah, these are some of the requirements we have for any project elements that involve community engagement, outreach, or education. And I believe they're referencing this last bullet. Funded activities should appropriately incentivize community residents for their time and expertise when participating in community engagement activities. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the community inclusion guidance that's linked in Appendix F. It's also just directly available on the STEP's Moving California webpage. It's the document called Community Inclusion Guidance, and that gives some recommendations as to how to incentivize community residents for their time and expertise. If your question is specifically about the appropriately part, that needs to be determined by the applicant and the community residents together. Every community is different, and at this time we don't have any specific requirements for how that expertise is, and time and participation is incentivized.
And then another question, was it Solano Advisories who partnered with STEP? And I believe they meant Estelano Advisors.
Yes, Estelano Advisors is the lead on the team of technical assistance providers. Oh, Sam Gregory found a reply to one of the previous questions that May 15th, 2019 was the first public work group on STEP for the fiscal year 2019-20 funding plan. Yes, thank you. So just for context, the funding plan is created annually to identify and propose to the public and to the board where funds how much funds will go to different Carb programs. STEP is new this year, this past fiscal year, and so that first funding plan, that funding plan effort was the first time that STEP was actually, the concept was proposed to the public.
So those are, again, all the questions right now.
Okay, thanks. We'll wait a couple more minutes, and if we get nothing else, then we'll close.
Okay, another question came in. Is there a newsletter or email sign up to get notified of future grants?
Yes, Carb has a Gov delivery. So the way I always find it is I type in Carb Gov delivery. And this is where you can sign up for, subscribe to any number of email updates from Carb. I will show you where you can find any opportunities that are similar to STEP. It should be under, oh boy, clean transportation incentives, and then clean and sustainable mobility options is the subtopic that we use for any information about STEP and some of the other similar grant programs. So you can sign up to Carb Gov delivery.
Another question. Will those of us participating on the session today automatically get registration notices for upcoming teleconferences?
No. You have to register for each individual teleconference that you're interested in using these links that are on the Steps Moving California webpage that we chatted in at the beginning of this session. You have to register for them each individually.
Another question. Will the written responses to today's questions automatically be emailed to attendees?
Yes, we will send out the written responses to everyone who registered for the webinar.
One more question. Can cities receive both types of grants or only apply for one type?
We have no restrictions on how many or what type of grant an applicant can apply for.
Another question: when will grant decisions be made for awarded projects?
Sure, I'll pull up that timeline again. Here we are. So the deadline for submitting proposals is August 31st. We will take the month of September to review and score the proposals and tentatively select preliminary grantees in October. The deadline to execute a grant agreement for these funds is May 14th, 2021. So within the time of preliminary selection and the execution of the grant agreement, we have a few deadlines in here to actually complete the grant agreement and finalize it with Carb.
And another question: for implementation projects, does this grant fund quick build materials?
So I'd encourage you, if you're interested in the implementation grant, to join the Q&A session at 2 p.m. or to wait and register for it at least, so you can get the Q&A document later, or look for it on our Moving California webpage. Similar to the planning capacity building grant solicitation, we have an Appendix E for project eligibility that includes the full list of eligible projects for the implementation grant. So what I think I'm going to do now is, there were some questions we received over email after the deadline that we can try to answer on this teleconference. I wanted to make sure that we got to everyone else's questions first. There is some overlap, so I'll skip any questions that we got in after the deadline that we already answered. But I will just go through a few more questions and answers based on the emailed in questions we received. So one question we got is it possible for this program to give partial awards? And if yes, will the applicants be able to scale down the project scope to the level it is being funded? So this is addressed on page 33 of the solicitation. Here we are. No, that's only 28. No, I'm past it. Okay, page 33 says here, Carb retains the right to remove discrete elements of proposals selected for funding that Carb determines to be ineligible, or to reduce the scope of a proposal to use any remaining funds. And then I also want to just highlight page 9 of the solicitation here that says, applicants are encouraged to demonstrate how project elements may be prioritized for funding in case the full proposal cannot be funded. So hopefully that helps. We have another question. Can you give explicit guidance on expected word count for the responses in the application? The space given in the application without adjusting row height seems to suggest 70 to 150 word counts per response. So Carb cannot provide any recommendations outside of what is already stated in the solicitation about how to put together a proposal or to fill out the proposal template. In the proposal template, which is Appendix B, right here, I'm not going to open it right now because it's an Excel spreadsheet and it'll take some time to download, but in this proposal template, it's stated in the instructions tab that applicants should try to fit their responses to the questions in the solicitation into the space provided in the proposal template. However, applicants are allowed to include attachments with more detail if they feel that it is necessary to fully or accurately answer a specific question. Applicants should include the file name of any attachment submitted in the relevant responses box of the proposal template. So we've got a couple questions about the letters of support. I'm going to pull that part up. First question is about the lead applicant letters of support. What is the purpose of the requirement for a lead applicant to submit a letter of support for the application they are submitting? So this is per page 13 of the Planning and Capacity Building Grant solicitation. The lead applicant's letter of support is the place in their proposal where they should do all of the following: define their contribution to the proposal, identify their role in developing the partnership structure, express a commitment to implementing the proposal if funded, highlight any strategies they are currently implementing or plan to implement that will support the proposed STEP-funded project, and identify any resource contributions they are committed to providing. And the second question about letters of support is, do you expect letters of support from elected officials and supporting agencies that are not technically a sub-applicant or a community partner? And our answer is no, we only expect letters of support from lead applicants, sub-applicants, and community partners as detailed in the instructions throughout this applicant eligibility section. We have some other applicant eligibility questions as well. Can you confirm that only one sub-applicant may be listed per project? There is no limit to the number of sub-applicants that may be listed per project, so it is not limited to one. Another question, if we plan to subcontract multiple community-based organizations for specific projects under the sub-applicant, how should we represent that in the application? Should those community-based organizations be listed as community partners? So again, I'll refer you to Appendix A for definitions of sub-applicant and for community partner if you scroll up. If the entity will be responsible for implementing a project or project element funded through STEP, as stated here in the sub-applicant definition, they should be identified as a sub-applicant. And then I'll go up to the community partner definition. If the entity will not be responsible for implementing projects funded through STEP, like the lead applicants and sub-applicants are, here you go. But instead, the entity will serve as a key stakeholder and representative of the STEP community. They should be identified as a community partner. So take a look at those definitions to determine how the partner should be represented. Another question is, can we list more than 10 community partners? The answer is yes. So the proposal template in Appendix B has 10, I believe it has 10 lines for community partners. You can add rows to the proposal template spreadsheet to list additional community partners, or you can attach another document to your proposal to include a list of additional community partners. We have a question about cost, like eligible costs. Can you provide any updated guidance or justification around food and childcare expenses being ineligible but still highly prioritized in the guidelines for public engagement? So the only thing we can say about that is that Carb lacks authority to allow funding for food, drink, refreshments, and childcare through STEP funds themselves. Those are allowed to be resource contributions. And I think the rest of the emails, the questions that we received in email after the deadline were covered in this teleconference. Before we close, are there any additional questions that have come up while I've been talking?
Yes, we got one more question. The question is, are more points given for projects that use more than one CBO sub-applicant? Does the inclusion of more community partners raise the project's scoring or likelihood of being funded?
So I will pull up the Appendix D, which is the scoring criteria. for this question. This appendix outlines exactly how all of the proposals will be scored. For the applicants and partnership structure, they will be scored with these criteria. So we're not specifically looking for a certain number of community partners or sub-applicants, but taking a look at these scoring criteria can give you a sense of what we're looking for out of those sub-applicants and community partners.
And no more questions have come in.
All right, and we're steadily losing attendees, so I think that's a sign. I'm going to wrap up the meeting with a few reminders and a review of the solicitation timeline. So please make sure, first off, that you read the sample grant agreement, which is Appendix I here in the Planning and Capacity Building Grant Solicitation before submitting a proposal. The sample grant agreement includes the grantee's scope of work, which are all the duties and requirements that a grantee will need to complete within the grant term. It also includes some provisions that absolutely cannot change in the final grant agreement. So those items under sections J, oversight and accountability, K, project records, and N, general provisions. So you need to make sure you're okay complying with those requirements before you submit an application. Staff will post the Q&A documents, the Q&A document as a follow-up to this Q&A session, and we'll send an email to notify all attendees that it's been posted. The solicitation says that the Q&A document will be posted within 3 business days or by early next week, and we will try to get them posted by that time, but it might take a little bit longer. We have 2 more applicant Q&A sessions, so I will pull up the timeline here. We have 1 more this afternoon, specifically for the implementation grant. So if you're interested in the that grant, you can tune in at 2 p.m. And then we have 1 more for both the Planning and Capacity Building grant and the implementation grant on August 13th at 3 p.m. And you can register for that session using this link. Carb staff will not respond to any questions after the final teleconference has taken place on August 13th. Applications are due August 31st, 2020 by 5 p.m. Pacific time. Please note that applications must be delivered to the physical or email address provided in the solicitation by this deadline. That includes any hand-delivered applications and applications submitted by a delivery service provider. So that concludes our Q&A session today. Thanks for your interest in STEP and hope you all have a good day.